used to sing Wish You Were Here in memory of your deceased brother Andy. And in this concert you have dedicated How Deep Is Your Love to him. Mm-hmm. Why did you change of tune?
Well, on the last concert,
we couldn't sing Wish You Were Here live. It was very hard to sing.
We could, but
no, finish. I don't mean that we couldn't, sing it properly. It was just very emotional to sing, and it was upsetting. How Deep Is Your Love wasn't so, because Wish You Were Here was written for Andy. So when we sang it on stage a couple of times, it was really hard to sing it because of the emotions involved.
When people think of the Bee Gees, it's usually the soaring falsettos, the disco lights, and the endless stream of #1 hits that come to mind. But what if you're told there's another side to the story, one Barry Gibb has only recently begun to share? Behind the spotlight and the success was Andy Gibb, the youngest brother who lived fast, loved hard, and carried secrets the world never fully knew. And Barry, even decades later, still speaks about him with the kind of honesty that stops you in your tracks. So what really happened to Andy, and what has Barry finally revealed?
It was always abstract. The medical story is that his heart was very bad, but he had lived a lifestyle that, very few of us in the family even knew about. So, what would you call it? The LA lifestyle.
Yeah.
You don't.
The story of Andy Gibb doesn't really start the way most people expect it to. It's not just another tale of someone being born into fame and then stepping neatly into the spotlight. Andy's path was messy, fast, and way more complicated than the posters of him smiling on teenage bedroom walls would ever let on. And maybe the most telling clue about where his life was headed came really early, when Andy walked away from school at just 13 years old. That one decision shaped everything that followed. Andy came into the world in March of 1958 in Manchester, England, and by the time he was old enough to walk, music was already the family business. His older brothers Barry, Robin, and Maurice had been chasing their dreams since the early 1960s, and for Andy, that meant he grew up watching his siblings rehearse harmonies in the living room, cut singles, and start climbing the charts long before he was even a teenager. He wasn't just the youngest of the 5 Gibb kids, he was nearly a full decade younger than his famous brothers. That age gap shaped him. It meant he looked up to them as not only siblings, but as larger-than-life figures who had already made it out of the small towns and into international stardom. Now, Andy never became the type to bury his head in books. School wasn't really his thing, and he admitted as much later. What caught his attention was the guitar. Barry gave him his very first acoustic, and even though Andy never learned to read music formally, he figured things out by ear. That was Andy. He had a natural feel for melody and rhythm, and he didn't need sheet music to make sense of it. By the time most kids were just figuring out what kind of career they might want one day, Andy was already restless. He didn't want to sit in classrooms. He wanted to be on a stage. So, at just 13 years old, he dropped out of school altogether. This wasn't some reckless move without direction. His parents had relocated to the island of Ibiza, Spain, where Andy started sneaking into little clubs and bars, guitar slung over his shoulder, to play for tourists and locals. Those early gigs weren't glamorous, but they toughened him up. Ibiza was full of travelers, artists, and musicians, so Andy got a crash course in how to connect with an audience. Later, when the family moved back to the Isle of Man, he kept at it, sharpening his stage presence. Barry, who was already well on his way with the Bee Gees, saw that spark in his youngest brother. He encouraged Andy to go to Australia in 1974, the same place where the Bee Gees themselves had really found their footing years earlier. That move proved to be pivotal. In Australia, Andy started forming bands of his own. One of them, Melody Fair, gave him his first taste of what it felt like to be part of a group, while another band called Zenta actually got him opening for big international acts who toured the country. Imagine being in your late teens and suddenly sharing a stage with groups like the Sweet or the Bay City Rollers, who were major draws at the time. Andy wasn't just some kid tagging along because of his brother's fame. He was out there proving he had something to offer on his own. What really tipped the scales for him was when his demo tapes caught the ear of Robert Stigwood, the powerhouse manager who was already guiding the Bee Gees' career. Stigwood didn't sign just anyone. He had a reputation for spotting talent, and he clearly saw potential in Andy. By 1976, Andy was only 18 years old, but already packing his bags for Miami, where he started working on what would become his debut album, Flowing Rivers. This is where the story really picks up. Barry was right by his side, along with the production duo Albie Galutin and Carl Richardson, who would go on to shape some of the biggest Bee Gees hits. And here's a moment that has gone down in music history. One day, in a 20-minute burst of inspiration, Barry wrote, "I just want to be your everything," while Andy looked on. Andy didn't just watch, he soaked it all in, witnessing firsthand how his older brother could take a melody out of thin air and turn it into something magical. When that single hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the summer of 1977, Andy's life changed overnight. And it didn't stop there. He followed it up with another chart topper, Love is Thicker Than Water, which, fun fact, actually started with Andy tossing out the idea for the title. Then came Shadow Dancing, which was special because all four Gibb brothers worked on it together. That song ruled the charts for 7 weeks and ended up being the biggest hit of 1978. Think about that. Andy was only 19 years old, and in less than 2 years, he had 3 #1 singles, sold millions of records, and was plastered across the walls of teenagers around the world. He had the looks, the voice, and the family name. Everything seemed unstoppable.
Famous a long time before I was, and they helped me get into the show business, and they still produce my records and write for me. But I suppose I was pretty much used to the business because of my brother's success. But it's still a nice thing to have.
But here's the thing Barry always noticed. Even when the rest of the world only saw the teen idol smile, there was a fragility about Andy. Behind the screaming crowds and the magazine covers, Barry could sense his younger brother was vulnerable, maybe even a little lost. That's the part of Andy's story that doesn't usually make the headlines, but it's exactly what Barry would later open up about, the hidden struggles that started to creep in right when Andy was supposed to be living his dream.
Have you ever felt a prisoner of the success?
No, when it very first started, just a few years back, I thought, this is crazy, I can't go anywhere, I can't do anything. Then I figure lately, you worry when it stops.
Do you have any regrets about not having the kind of youth that most people have?
Yeah, I had a very different type of schooling that most people have. I left school very young. I suppose my whole growing up period was very different. But I have no regrets, no. I'd do it again because this is what came of it.
When you look back at Andy Gibb's rise, it's almost impossible not to be struck by how fast everything came together for him. #1 singles, screaming fans, magazine covers everywhere. But the truth is, those bright moments often make the darker parts harder to ignore. And in Andy's case, the shadows were there from the very beginning of his fame. On the outside, he had the kind of success most young artists could only dream about: multi-platinum records, sold-out tours, and the image of a teen idol who seemed to have it all figured out. Inside, though, it was a very different story. Andy was dealing with insecurities that never really left him. Being the youngest Gibb came with a certain weight, because no matter how talented he was always comparing himself to Barry, Robin, and Maurice. Those three had already carved out a place in music history as the Bee Gees, and Andy sometimes wondered if people loved him for who he was, or just because he was the younger brother. Barry would try to lift him up, reminding him that his success was unique and well-earned, but Andy had a hard time shaking that feeling that he didn't quite measure up. That self-doubt found an easy outlet in the Miami music and party scene of the late 1970s. Cocaine was everywhere at the time, and for Andy, what started as something passed around at parties quickly became part of his daily routine. At first, it seemed like a way to keep up with the demands of fame, the touring, the press, the constant pressure to stay on. But before long, it stopped being something fun and turned into the only way he thought he could cope. Friends and family noticed the change, but Andy wasn't ready to admit how much control the D had over him. And while the music was still hitting the charts, his personal life was becoming more complicated. One of the most talked about chapters of his life was his relationship with Victoria Principal, the actress best known for her role on Dallas. The two met in the early 1980s, and their romance instantly grabbed attention. They were young, beautiful, and seemed completely wrapped up in each other. Tabloids couldn't get enough of their photos. To the public, it looked like a storybook romance, but behind the scenes, the cracks were showing. Andy's D use was becoming impossible to ignore, and it started to put a strain on the relationship. Those closest to them said the couple had isolated themselves, spending so much time together that they cut off many of their friends. Victoria eventually gave him a choice that countless loved ones of addicts end up giving: either get rid of the D or lose her. Andy couldn't let go of the addiction, and when the relationship ended in 1982, it devastated him. Later, he admitted that losing her was one of the biggest regrets of his life, and that without her, he leaned even more heavily on his family just to get through the heartbreak. Professionally, things were slipping just as fast. In 1981, Andy landed a co-hosting role on the hit television show Solid Gold, working alongside Marilyn McCoo. It should have been a fresh start and a chance to show he could succeed outside of music, but his unreliability got in the way. Around the same time, he was cast in big stage productions like Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat on Broadway and The Pirates of Penzance on tour. These were opportunities most performers would fight for, but Andy's absences and last-minute cancellations because of cocaine binges left producers frustrated. One producer of Joseph later said that Andy was wonderful when he actually showed up to work, but the problem was, he just wasn't there enough. By 1982, Andy was starting to see what his choices had cost him. In a brutally honest interview that year, he admitted, "I had everything I wanted, and I just blew it all up." For someone who had achieved so much before turning 20, it was heartbreaking to see how quickly it all unraveled. And yet, through all of this, the one thing that didn't change was his family's determination to help him. But what happens when love and loyalty run headfirst into addiction, an illness that doesn't care how famous or talented someone is? One of the things that really defined Andy's story wasn't just his rise or his struggles, but how much his family kept trying to pull him back every time he slipped. Their mother, Barbara, had made Barry promise years earlier that he would always look after his youngest brother, and Barry took that promise seriously, sometimes more seriously than his own career. He rearranged recording schedules, skipped studio sessions, and even put off his own commitments to make sure Andy wasn't left alone when things started to spiral. It wasn't just about being a big brother anymore. Barry felt the weight of being Andy's protector, even when it was exhausting and nearly impossible to keep up with. The truth was, Andy's life had started to run away from him. He was living fast, spending big, and giving in to the temptations that came with fame at such a young age. Private planes, flashy cars, and boats weren't just luxuries for him. They were his way of keeping up the image of a superstar. But with addiction feeding that lifestyle, the bills piled up faster than he could manage. By the mid-1980s, Andy's finances were in serious trouble. The teen idol who had earned millions in his early 20s was suddenly facing debts he couldn't pay. By 1987, things reached the point where Andy filed for bankruptcy, reporting that his income for the entire year was less than $8,000, while his debts had climbed over $1 million. It was a crushing moment, not only for Andy but for his family, who had to step in and pick up the pieces. Barry and his brothers helped cover what debts they could, and they tried to create some kind of stability by setting him up in a Miami condominium so he could be close to them. They gave him a small allowance to cover his day-to-day life, hoping that keeping him near family would stop him from slipping any further. But looking after Andy wasn't just about money. It was about constant emotional support. The family tried every approach imaginable. There were gentle heart-to-heart talks where they reminded him of his talent and how much he was loved. There were formal interventions, and there were stints in rehabilitation facilities, including his well-known stay at the Betty Ford Center in 1985. Each time, there was hope that this would be the turning point. And for a while, Andy would come out looking brighter and determined to stay clean. But the relapses always followed, and the cycle would start all over again. Barry later admitted how powerless he often felt, saying that no amount of love, fame, or financial support could fight Andy's battles for him. And that was the most painful part, because from the outside, fans still saw the same smiling face on magazine covers, and they still sang along to his songs as though nothing had changed. But for Barry, Robin, Maurice, and their parents, every headline and every old song was just a reminder of the younger brother they were trying so desperately to save.
You can't watch it? No, it's too hard.
Too hard.
Is it because it makes you sad or because...
No, it just makes me emotional.
Yeah, how special they were. You all right?
Yeah.
By the early 1980s, the music world was changing fast. The disco-driven sound that had turned Andy Gibb into a star just a few years earlier was slipping out of fashion, and radio stations were shifting toward new wave, soft rock, and emerging pop acts. For someone like Andy, who had exploded onto the scene with the hits that captured the late 70s perfectly, it suddenly became much harder to find his place. On top of that, his reputation in the industry had started to catch up with him. People loved his talent, but promoters and producers also remembered the missed shows and last-minute cancellations. It made the idea of a comeback feel more like an uphill climb than a sure thing. His voice was still there, though it didn't quite have the same sparkle it once did. It was a little huskier, a little more weathered, and fans could hear the strain behind the charm. Doctors had already warned him that years of cocaine use had weakened his heart muscle. One doctor even told him that although he was only in his mid-20s, his heart looked like it belonged to someone in their 50s. Andy would nod, agree to take it easy, and then fall back into old habits, chasing comfort where he thought he could find it. In 1980, he released After Dark, which would turn out to be his final studio album. Barry was heavily involved, producing most of the tracks and even layering his own harmonies to help steady Andy's vocals. The record had some bright spots like Desire, a Bee Gees track reworked for Andy, and I Can't Help It, a duet with family friend Olivia Newton-John that made it into the top 20. Still, the album didn't perform the way his earlier records had, and soon after RSO Records, the same label that had once made him a star, had to let him go. Even Robert Stigwood, the label head, admitted it was a painful decision, but one he felt was unavoidable. Andy tried different projects, even recording a duet of All I Have to Do Is Dream with Victoria Principal, but that stalled outside the top 50. For a man who had once been on top of the charts worldwide, it was a tough reality check. By 1987, things hit rock bottom when he filed for bankruptcy. The news made headlines, and for Andy, who already carried so many insecurities, it was a blow he never fully got past. For Barry, Moments like this brought back the image of Andy as a kid, strumming a guitar and laughing without a care, when music was about joy and not survival. While things looked bleak, the family kept holding on, hoping there was still a way forward. And in early 1988, it really did feel, at least for a little while, like Andy might be turning a corner. He had gone through another round of rehab the year before, and for the first time in years, there were signs of real progress. Barry had just secured a new record deal with Island Records in the United Kingdom, and the plan was for Andy to start fresh in England. He moved into a carriage house on Robin's estate, where the family hoped the quiet countryside would give him some peace and focus. But the comeback wasn't as steady as it looked from the outside. Andy was still weighed down by the breakup with Victoria Principal, and those lingering feelings of failure made him anxious. He missed meetings with the record company, and those missed chances eventually caused the deal to collapse before it even began. His brothers wanted so badly to see him back on stage, but it always seemed like something was pulling him backwards.
Was it tough for you because it was so public?
Yeah, but what was so strange is that it was public for both of us. It wasn't just public for me. You know, we were both celebrities dating each other. And it was strange because when we split up, it was so intense, our relationship, that when we did split up, it didn't seem, what hurt me was that she didn't seem to go through any pain at all. And I felt a bit strange being the man feeling the pain and the weakness. And it really was hell for me, it really was. I had a nervous breakdown. And of course there was that like, I'm the man, I shouldn't be acting like this. I should be the one to rally and be strong.
On March 5th of 1988, Andy celebrated his 30th birthday in London. Family and friends were there, and for a short moment, it felt like things were okay. 2 days later, though, he was admitted to John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford with chest pains. Barry flew in immediately, sitting with him and talking about old guitars and the songs they used to write as kids. Andy still had his sense of humor, joking that maybe their next tune should be a country ballad about second chances. But just 5 days after his birthday, on March 10th, Andy collapsed and passed away. Doctors said it was myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart muscle, likely triggered by a virus. But everyone knew the years of D-use had left his heart too weak to fight back. Barry has spoken about it many times since, but never in a way that feels rehearsed. He remembers Andy like you'd remember a younger brother tugging at your sleeve, asking you to teach him a harmony. He still performs Andy's songs now and then, telling stories between verses, making sure his brother isn't just remembered for how he died, but for the joy he brought when he lived. And when Barry talks to audiences about Andy, he often shares a message that comes from somewhere very personal. Don't wait until it's too late to reach out for help. It's his way of turning loss into something that might save someone else. And it's also his way of keeping Andy close, through the music, through the memories, and through the lessons that came with loving him. If you found this video thrilling, be sure to leave a comment, subscribe to our channel for more videos on your favorite icons.